Hello, everybody. We're going to go into our next presentation on the history of restoration through indemnity. We're really going to get into the meat here, and we're just going to finish up on some of the principal aspects of the principle of restoration through indemnity, and then see it exemplified in our first providential family, in Adam's family. So where we left off in our last segment, we talked about the bad conditions that transformed a living Adam into a dead Adam, and thus the mission of the historical central figures of the Old Testament is to lay down the indemnity conditions, to rectify, to reverse the bad conditions that changed a living Adam into a dead Adam. And then the last time we examined what was Adam's responsibility and what was the essential nature of those bad conditions. So the central figure, we're going to see a consistent pattern throughout each of the central figures, because they're called to do the same thing. To, number one, establish a foundation of faith by reversing through indemnity the loss of faith in God's Word by Adam. And number two, the mission of the central figure will be to restore the elder son's birthright, the elder son's dominion, to restore the right order, which was usurped. The archangel took the position of God and ruler over Adam. Adam was supposed to inherit the authority of God, the life, love, and lineage of God, and have dominion over all things. And the archangel usurped that position, so there was a change of the blood order. Therefore, the central figure in establishing the foundation of substance must reverse the convoluted blood order. And so we're going to see that consistently through each providential figure and providential family. And when the central figure is able to accomplish that, number one and number two, the foundation of faith and the foundation of substance, then we say that forms the foundation for the Messiah. And what that represents symbolically is the resurrection of one dead Adam. And in substance, it is the foundation for the new Adam, living Adam, the second Adam, for Jesus to come on that foundation. And that's why it took 4,000 biblical years. Jesus didn't come right after the fall of man. Although he was needed, he didn't come right after the fall of man. In fact, it took 4,000 years. And the delay, the prolongation, was because this foundation had to be laid. That's our portion of responsibility. So the central figure must indemnify the foundation of faith, and to do so, certain components are needed. And number one, we're going to have a central figure, obviously, and that's the providential figure that God calls, be it Abel, be it Noah, be it Moses, be it Abraham. And secondly, he's going to need what we call a conditional object of faith. Now, Adam lost God's Word, so God's Word has to be recovered. That's why you'll notice in the early part, what we call the pre-Old Testament era, there was no written word. There was no spoken word that was written down and codified as the foundation and the root of the tribe or the society. We see that initially the basis of relationship and of establishing a faith covenant was centering around what we call conditional objects. And essentially, in this era, it was animal sacrifices, or in the case of Noah, it was the ark. Something that represents or symbolizes the truth, because the truth has been lost and needs to be recovered. And of course, a third component is a time period, because obviously, for faith to really be established, a certain time period to maintain faith is needed. So when the central figure can accomplish these elements, then this is the criterion for the foundation of faith to be established, and the restoration of the loss of faith in God's Word by Adam. So that's the first step or the first responsibility that each central figure will be given. It's characteristic, it's a parallel, it's a reoccurring event in each providential figure's dispensation. That's why we see that when God called Abel and Cain to make an offering, they had to offer, Abel offered the best of his flock. Noah built the ark. Abraham initially made an animal sacrifice and then later had to make a condition of greater amount when he had to show faith by a willingness to even sacrifice his son. Moses had to go through a trial of faith, 40 years in the Pharaoh's palace. The tribes, during the period of when they entered into the promised land, centering on Joshua, and for the next 400 years, the standard, the parameter was to what extent they could maintain faith in the laws and decrees and commandments of God. And if they could, they would be blessed. If they couldn't, they would be cursed. And also we see that the kings, the period of kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, it was the law that they would have to maintain a standard of faith. And even John the Baptist, before he could meet Jesus and recognize him and baptize him, had to live a life of faith, an ascetic life in the wilderness, fasting and praying and preparing himself, receiving revelations and being tested in many ways. So this is characteristic of every providential central figure. It starts with them establishing a foundation of faith. And once that foundation of faith is accomplished by the central figure, we see that they immediately will move into phase 2 of the indemnity operation of restoration. And that is the restoration of the elder brother's position, which was lost by Adam, restoring the proper blood order, which was usurped by the archangel who was in the servant position, taking the position of God and ruler. Adam, who was to have dominion over all things on earth and in spirit, inheriting God's authority, became a slave to sin. So this reversal of dominion must be restored to the proper standard, the proper blood order. And so this explains why we see a second reoccurring pattern. And of course, as we've already mentioned, this archangel usurping the position and the authority of Adam and Eve. And as we studied in the fall, that the circumstance of the Garden of Eden was a change of blood order, so to speak, a change of authority. And the archangel reversed that, rejected the commandment, and then took the position of God and ruler, Adam becoming a slave to sin. So this restoration of the blood order, the reversal of dominion, we see this as a reoccurring pattern throughout the history of restoration through indemnity. That's why we see this reoccurring pattern of younger and elder, and the younger being placed in the central position over the elder, with, for example, Abel and Cain. Later we'll see it was Shem and Ham. Isaac and Ishmael. Always the younger is placed in a more favored position, and the elder is compelled to do, in a sense, what's unnatural, which is to come under the authority of the younger brother. We see this reoccurring with Jacob and Esau, the story of Jacob and Esau. And also even inside the womb, which we'll take a look at later with Tamar. Inside the womb, Perez and Zerah reverse the natural blood order inside the womb. Moses and the Israelites, the case of Judah and Israel on the national level, and even a very interesting parallel is that John the Baptist, a descendant of Jacob the younger, and Herod, a descendant of Esau the elder. Herod was an Edomite who were the descendants of Esau. So, again, the two brothers grappling and trying to establish a restored blood order is the essence of establishing the foundation of substance, and we'll see that parallel throughout the history of the central figures. Let's go in quickly into Adam's family and see how this actually operates. The foundation of faith, the condition to restore the lost foundation of faith, as we mentioned, we're going to need a central figure, a conditional object, and a time period. That central figure is Abel. Abel takes the position of central figure. And the conditional object, CO, stands for conditional object, is going to be animal sacrifices. He offers the best of his flock. And then it was an indeterminable time period, but over a certain time period he had to demonstrate faith, obviously, in the offering of the best of his flock. So, in a very interesting moment in the story of Cain and Abel, is that God accepts Abel's offering. Abel, of course, the second-born. And God rejects Cain's offering. Cain, of course, being the firstborn. Now, of course, this is, again, a dramatic reversal of what is the natural blood order. Naturally, the elder is in the central position, and the younger must respect the elder. But here, God is reversing it. And that's because the agenda moves towards establishing through indemnity the foundation of substance, and it involves restoring the proper order. So, because order was usurped involving two figures, an Adam figure and an archangel figure, then it stands to reason the process of indemnity will involve likewise two figures who will stand in an archangel position and an Adamic position to reverse the usurped blood order. And of course our players in Adam's family, the archangel figure is going to be Cain, the firstborn. The Adam figure, as we've already stated, is Abel, the secondborn. Now, one reason that the firstborn represents the archangel is because Cain was born closer to the spiritual fall. Of the two falls, of spiritual and physical fall, the spiritual fall was much more evil. And because Cain was born closer to the more evil fall, then Cain takes the position of the archangel, takes the side of evil. And the second-born, born more distant from the spiritual fall, then takes a position of relative good and finds himself in the Adamic position, in the what we now will call Abel position. And this is our central figure, Abel. And look what God does. He reverses their position. He really reverses the natural order. And of course, this is the reverse process of how dominion was lost in the Garden of Eden. How God's sovereignty, in a sense, was separated from the first human family, and by extension over the world. So, dominion is reversed, and then God speaks to Cain. In other words, what's happening to Cain is not a bad thing. God is not rejecting Cain personally. And when God speaks to Cain in Genesis 4:6-7, you should read that. He's really encouraging him, and he says, look, if you do what is right, you'll be received. So what Cain needs to realize is he's in the Cain position, which means he's in the archangel position. Now, what was the archangel's problem? The archangel's problem is he didn't want to come to God through Adam, right? He was contesting that authority represented in the commandment. He didn't want to come to God through Adam. He left his proper position. He didn't love Adam from God's viewpoint, and so forth and so on. And then, feeling justified, he usurped the position of God over Adam by giving a false word, and as we've studied quite extensively. So, if Cain can come to God through Abel, which is what God is trying to set up. If Cain can walk that course, then Satan cannot follow. This is why we effectively separate from Satan if we walk the course to reverse the process of the fall, in essence. And so that's why God is encouraging Cain. Look, if you do what is right, you'll be received. And what is right is that you come to God through your younger brother. Do it. Do it. You'll be received. And of course, if Cain walks this path, Satan cannot follow that path, because the very foundation of Satan's nature is based upon refusing to come to God through Adam. And that's why what we're seeing here is the early manifestation of the Christ sinner paradigm, where the sinner can't come to God directly. The sinner must be willing to come to God through acquiescing to the authority of Christ, the Christ figure, the Adamic figure. So all of this is foreshadowing what ultimately will be our relationship with the Christ who is to come. And of course, this is making the foundation for that to happen. Sadly, this didn't take place, and instead, Cain's satanic nature took dominion over him, and thus he killed Abel, and this was the first murder. And rather than conquering himself, just as God had warned him that sin is crouching at your door, it desires to have you, you must master it. You must master it. But he was unable to master it, and it mastered him. And so we can see the will of Satan here was to crush Abel, to prevent Cain from coming to God through Abel, because Satan knew that would make a foundation for the Messiah. Abel had made a foundation of faith. If he had made this foundation of substance, the foundation for the Messiah would have been laid in Adam's family, on the family level, which means that Christ could have come at that time in history, which is what God wanted. You see, God didn't want the providence of salvation to be a world-level providence, which is so painful, so complicated. God didn't want thousands of years of suffering and toil and pain and grief. God wanted to bring restoration immediately, right in the realm of Adam's family. At this point, sin is but the problem of one family. And God worked a providence to bring restoration in that family. And what we've not understood is that it involves a portion of responsibility on the part of the providential people. And in the case of Adam's family, they utterly failed. And so we'll conclude here, and in our next segment, we'll look at Noah's family. Noah's family will be our next providential family, 10 generations, 1,600 years later. Thank you for studying with us today. I hope this was helpful and interesting. And you have a great day. God bless you. Bye-bye.